After centuries of terror, the name Lord Malakar the Dreaded sent shivers down the spines of men, women, and particularly unfortunate livestock. His obsidian fortress loomed over the land like a permanent storm cloud. His armies marched relentlessly, and his monologues about doom were considered legendary in villainous circles. And then, one day, he quit. No more sieges. No more cackling from atop burning citadels. No more dramatic entrances in swirls of black smoke. He was done. It wasn't the exhausting battles or the backstabbing lieutenants that pushed him into retirement. It wasn't even the never-ending paperwork that came with running a dark empire. No, what finally broke Lord Malakar was the realization that heroes never stopped coming. They just wouldn't leave him alone. Every month, without fail, some fresh-faced warrior would burst into his throne room, wielding a shiny sword and an overinflated sense of destiny. They'd scream something about justice, he'd roll his eyes, and 10 minutes later, they'd be catapulted into the nearest river. And yet, more always came, so he left. With a hefty sack of stolen gold, Lord Malakar disappeared overnight, abandoning his dark fortress, his monstrous army, and the sheer burden of being the big bad. Instead, he bought a cottage. A quaint, charming, utterly disgusting little cottage in a quiet village that had never heard of him. The people were simple, the air smelled like freshly baked bread, and the most dangerous thing in town was an elderly woman's pet goose. It was perfect. For the first time in centuries, Malakar woke up to silence. No war horns, no swords clashing, no knights shouting from outside his fortress. Just birds chirping and a light breeze rustling the trees. He spent his mornings drinking tea on his porch, watching villagers go about their lives without a single care. He spent his afternoons tending to his horrific vegetable garden, where plants mysteriously withered at his touch. Evenings were quiet, spent reading books he had once stolen from crumbling libraries. For a while, it was bliss. And then, trouble found him. The first problem was his neighbor. The house next door belonged to Sir Edwin Brightshield, a retired hero who had once dedicated his life to slaying villains just like Malakar. Fortunately, the man was oblivious to his new neighbor's identity. Unfortunately, he was also the most annoyingly friendly person alive. Every morning, without fail, Edwin knocked on Malakar's door, asking for sugar. The first time, Malakar assumed it was a one-time inconvenience. The second time, he was annoyed. By the 10th time, he was convinced Edwin was doing it on purpose. The second problem arrived in the form of a bounty hunter. Malakar had barely settled into his peaceful life when a shadowy figure burst through his window, daggers flashing. The bounty hunter had been young, eager, and very stupid. The fight lasted exactly 3 seconds before Malakar threw him into the duck pond. The third problem was worse. It came in the form of a cursed artifact. One evening, while Malakar was attempting to bake bread, and failing spectacularly, a peculiar package arrived on his doorstep. No sender, no markings, just an old dust-covered chest. The moment he opened it, the room darkened. The air hummed with ancient magic. Something woke up. Malakar shut the chest immediately. Nope, he had retired. This was not his problem. With a deep sigh, he lifted the chest and walked to the edge of his garden, intending to bury it forever. But just as he grabbed a shovel, someone knocked on his door. It was Sir Edwin, standing there with a cheerful grin. "Malakar, old friend, might I trouble you for some more sugar?" Malakar resisted the overwhelming urge to throw the chest at his head. And that was when he knew. The universe would never let him retire. Lord Malakar stood in his doorway, holding a cursed chest in one hand and a shovel in the other, while Sir Edwin Brightshield beamed at him from the porch. It was a scene that perfectly encapsulated Malakar's new life. Once, he had stood atop obsidian towers, gazing down upon kneeling armies. Once, his name had been whispered in terror across the land. Now, his greatest battle was trying to get rid of a retired hero and an ominous box of doom at the same time. Edwin, of course, was oblivious to all of it. "I don't mean to impose," Edwin said, already imposing, "but I seem to have run out of sugar once again." Malakar had a theory that Edwin never actually used the sugar. The man was testing him. But Malakar was an expert manipulator. He had deceived kings and corrupted noble hearts. He could handle one persistent idiot. "I'm out," Malakar lied, shoving the cursed chest behind his back. "No sugar. Sorry, go away." Edwin squinted at him. "Are you holding a shovel?" Malakar paused. He was, in fact, holding a shovel, a perfectly normal thing for a humble retiree to hold. "Yes," Malakar said. "Gardening." Edwin peered behind him. "And what's in the box?" Malakar considered his options. He could lie. He could set Edwin on fire. Or a crash came from inside the house. Malakar swore under his breath. He knew that sound. It was the sound of an incompetent assassin breaking something expensive. Edwin perked up. "Do you have a guest?" Malakar sighed. "Not for much longer." He shoved the cursed chest into Edwin's hands. "Hold this," Malakar said, stepping inside. "Wait, what?" Edwin protested, but Malakar was already gone. Inside, his kitchen was in shambles. The bounty hunter had returned. The young assassin, the same fool Malakar had thrown into the duck pond yesterday, was currently dangling from a chandelier, caught in the act of trying to steal Malakar's stolen gold. "Ah," Malakar said. "You again." The bounty hunter froze. Then, ever so slowly, he tried to swing toward the window. Malakar raised a hand. The chandelier's chain snapped. The assassin crashed to the floor. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the bounty hunter let out a weak, pained groan. Malakar sighed. "I suppose I should ask what you want before I throw you into the pond again." The bounty hunter groaned louder. Outside, Edwin's voice carried through the open door. "Malakar, the chest is vibrating." Malakar cursed. He had forgotten about the box. He turned back to the assassin, now groaning more dramatically. "Do not move," Malakar ordered. Then he stormed outside. Edwin was still standing on the porch, holding the cursed chest like it was a mildly unpleasant fruitcake. "The good news," Edwin said, "is that it stopped vibrating." Malakar narrowed his eyes. "And the bad news?" Edwin smiled sheepishly. "It started whispering." Malakar groaned. "Of course it did." At that moment, the chest burst open. A cloud of black smoke exploded outward, filling the air with a sharp, metallic scent. The trees shuddered, the sky darkened, and from the swirling shadows, a figure emerged. A massive, hooded, very ominous figure. Malakar sighed. He really, really hated retirement. The shadowy figure that emerged from the cursed chest towered over Malakar and Edwin, its form shifting like black smoke caught in an invisible wind. The air around them grew thick and heavy, charged with an ancient, malevolent energy. Malakar had accidentally unleashed many dark entities in his time, so he immediately recognized two things. 1. This was bad. 2. This was his fault. The figure's glowing red eyes fixated on Malakar. A voice, deep as the abyss, rumbled through the air. "Who dares release me from my eternal prison?" Malakar resisted the overwhelming urge to throw the chest at his head. And that was when he knew. The universe would never let him retire. Malakar pinched the bridge of his nose. Edwin, oblivious to danger as always, took a step forward, studying the being with genuine curiosity. "I'm sorry," Edwin said, rubbing his chin. "I don't think we've met." "You are." The entity's shadowy form coiled and expanded, filling the space around them. "I am Vorlax, Scourge of Realms, Bringer of Ruin, Devourer of..." Malakar held up a hand. Yes, we get it. You're very evil. Move it along." Vorlax paused. No one had ever interrupted him before. He seemed offended. "I have waited 1,000 years to be free," Vorlax thundered. "You shall tremble before my power." Malakar yawned. "I really don't have time for this." Edwin elbowed him. "Be polite." Malakar glared at him. "Edwin, do you even understand what's happening?" Edwin pointed at Vorlax. "Yes, he's introducing himself." Before Malakar could strangle Edwin, Vorlax raised a clawed hand and snapped his fingers. The sky split with lightning. The trees withered. The ground shook. A glowing chain of runes wrapped around Malakar's wrist. Malakar stared at the cursed binding, then at Vorlax. "Oh, you absolute idiot," Malakar muttered. Vorlax laughed, voice booming. "Now you belong to me, Dark Lord. Your soul shall be my servant for all eternity." Edwin gasped. "Malakar, you're cursed!" Malakar turned to Edwin, his expression deadpan. "No, Edwin. I just love glowing wrist jewelry." Vorlax smirked. "Your power now serves me." Malakar flexed his fingers. The rune-covered chain glowed, tightening. He sighed. He had spent years building his reputation as a fearsome sorcerer, and now, in his so-called peaceful retirement, he was bound to some second-rate horror villain. Truly, this was a disaster. Vorlax grinned. "And now, we shall begin our—" A thud interrupted him. All three turned toward the porch. The bounty hunter, whom Malakar had completely forgotten about, had crawled outside and promptly collapsed. Malakar groaned. Edwin rushed to help the bounty hunter, while Vorlax tilted his head. "Who is this wretch?" Malakar waved a dismissive hand. "Nobody important." The bounty hunter groaned. "I resent that." Vorlax raised his hands, preparing a spell. "Should I destroy him?" Edwin gasped. "Absolutely not." Malakar sighed. "Edwin, why do you care?" Edwin pointed at the bounty hunter. "Because he's injured." Malakar folded his arms. "And?" Edwin frowned. "And it would be wrong to ignore him." Malakar stared. Was that guilt? Had he really been retired for so long that Edwin's ridiculous morals were actually starting to affect him? Before Malakar could process this disturbing thought, Vorlax sneered. "Pathetic?" he said. "You would show mercy to a broken enemy?" Malakar turned back to the shadowy being, scowling. "Look, I don't tell you how to do your job, so don't tell me how to do mine." Vorlax blinked. "But you work for me." Malakar smirked. "Do I?" He raised his cursed hand. The runes flared. Malakar felt power rush through his veins, and more importantly, he felt control. Vorlax's red eyes widened. He had just realized his mistake. Malakar grinned. "Oh, you absolute fool." The moment Malakar gripped the cursed chain, the power surged through him like an unstoppable wave of chaos. It was exhilarating, intoxicating, and entirely too familiar. Vorlax, the so-called Scourge of Realms, staggered back. His shadowy form flickered. He had expected Malakar to be a broken servant, bound to his will. What he had not expected was that Malakar had spent centuries mastering dark magic. Malakar's smirk widened. "Vorlax, tell me, how much experience do you have with curses?" Vorlax growled. "Enough to know you cannot break my bindings." Malakar raised a brow. "Break? No. Why would I break something so useful?" Vorlax hesitated. The ground trembled beneath them. The chain on Malakar's wrist tightened, glowing with cursed energy. Then, Malakar pulled. The dark runes flared, reversing the flow of power, and Vorlax screamed. The mighty demon, the harbinger of destruction, the so-called nightmare of realms, was yanked forward like a startled house cat. Edwin gasped. "Oh my!" The bounty hunter, still groaning on the porch, muttered, "That's probably not good." Malakar, however, was delighted. "Ah, see? Now we're getting somewhere." Vorlax glared at him. "What have you done?" Malakar inspected his wrist, admiring the runes as they shifted and twisted. "Oh, nothing much," he said. "I just adjusted our contract." Vorlax froze. "Impossible." Malakar tilted his head. "Is it?" Vorlax's form flickered. He tried to pull away, but the curse yanked him back. Realization dawned in his glowing red eyes. "No," Vorlax whispered. Malakar grinned. "Oh, yes." He had turned the binding against Vorlax. The demon, in all his arrogance, had failed to realize that Malakar had spent centuries binding creatures to his will. He had learned every loophole, every trick, every fine print detail of cursed contracts. And Vorlax? He had made the mistake of assuming Malakar was just another fool. Malakar clasped his hands together. "Well, since you work for me now, I think it's time we discuss your new role." Vorlax snarled. "I serve no one!" Malakar gestured with his cursed hand, and Vorlax's form jerked like a puppet on a string. The demon froze, seething. Malakar sighed. "Vorlax, let's be practical. You're stuck here, I'm stuck here, and I'd rather not have a rampaging demon ruining my already terrible retirement. So let's strike a deal." Vorlax hissed. "What kind of deal?" Malakar's smile turned sharp. "Oh, something simple. You work for me, you don't destroy anything I like, and in return, I might consider letting you leave." Vorlax's form twisted, his rage boiling. But he knew the truth. He had lost. "Fine," he spat. "But know this, sorcerer, I shall have my revenge." Malakar patted Vorlax's shoulder. Sure, get in line." Edwin, who had been watching all of this like a child seeing magic for the first time, clapped his hands. "Marvelous! A demon butler! Oh, Malakar, your life is so interesting." Malakar groaned. "Don't make this worse, Edwin." Vorlax grumbled. The bounty hunter, still half conscious, raised a weak hand. "I just want to go home." Malakar sighed. "Fine. Edwin, can you carry him?" Edwin beamed. "Of course!" Vorlax, however, was not done sulking. He turned toward Malakar. "What is my first task, master?" Malakar grimaced. "Don't call me that." "It is required." Malakar rubbed his temples. "I hate this already." Edwin perked up. "Oh, can he help clean up the mess?" Vorlax's entire being seemed to vibrate with rage. Malakar considered it. Then he shrugged. "Sure. Vorlax, go fetch the broom." Vorlax screamed. Vorlax, Scourge of Realms, Harbinger of Nightmares, Destroyer of Kingdoms, stood in the middle of Malakar's ruined front yard, holding a broom. A broom! His glowing red eyes flickered with eternal fury as he clutched the pitiful cleaning tool in his massive, clawed hands. The once mighty demon, feared across dimensions, now faced his most humiliating fate yet. Malakar, seated comfortably in his rocking chair, sipped a cup of tea. "Keep sweeping, Vorlax," he said. Vorlax snarled. Edwin, sitting beside Malakar with a plate of biscuits, watched in delight. "I must say, I never thought I'd see a demon doing housework. What a fascinating sight!" Vorlax's entire body trembled. His rage had no limits. This was not how things were supposed to go. He was supposed to be ruling this pathetic plane, not dusting off a porch. "This is an insult to my power," he bellowed. "I have reduced mountains to ash. I have sunk cities into the sea. I have—" Malakar snapped his fingers. Vorlax's body jerked mid-rant as the cursed chain tightened around his wrist. "Less talking, more sweeping," Malakar said, eyes still closed. Vorlax let out a deep, murderous growl, but he swept. The broom scraped against the wooden porch, the most insulting sound in existence. The bounty hunter, still half-conscious from his earlier misfortune, lay sprawled out on the ground, watching all of this with a vacant expression. "I think I'm in a nightmare," he muttered. Malakar sighed. "If only." Vorlax, meanwhile, was muttering curses in an ancient demonic tongue. If Malakar wasn't so used to it, he might have been worried about the sheer cosmic horror of what the demon was saying. Edwin, however, was amused. "I do believe you're quite good at this, Vorlax," he said cheerfully. Vorlax froze. A compliment to a demon for sweeping. A part of him died inside. Malakar smirked. "See, Vorlax? You have a future outside of destruction." Vorlax gripped the broom tighter. If he still had his full power, he would have turned this entire plane into a burning ruin just out of spite. But now he was a janitor. His hatred burned like 1,000 dying stars. And then, a shadow fell over the house. Malakar frowned. He looked up. Something loomed in the sky. A massive airship. Dozens of armored knights lined its decks, weapons glistening in the sunlight. Their banners flapped in the wind, the insignia of the Grand Order of Heroes. Malakar sighed. Edwin blinked. "Oh my, is that?" "Yes," Malakar muttered. The bounty hunter, still on the ground, groaned. "Oh no!" Vorlax, however, looked thrilled. "Yes!" he growled, eyes glowing brighter. "This is it! Battle, bloodshed, the screams of mortals! I shall—" Malakar held up a hand. Vorlax froze. Then Malakar pointed at the broom. Vorlax's joy instantly vanished. "Finish sweeping first," Malakar said. Vorlax howled in despair. Meanwhile, the Grand Order's ship began to descend. The airship loomed above Malakar's cottage, blocking out the sun. The Grand Order of Heroes had arrived, and they were not subtle about it. A trumpet blared from the deck, its ear-piercing sound making Malakar wince. A heroic voice boomed down from above. "Lord Malakar, your reign of terror ends today." Malakar sighed deeply. "This again." Edwin took a polite sip of tea. "My, they're dramatic." The bounty hunter on the ground groaned. He had been trying to crawl away unnoticed, but with the Grand Order here, he was very much regretting all of his life choices. Malakar remained in his rocking chair, unfazed. "Let's get this over with." Vorlax, meanwhile, was gripping the broom so tightly it might have turned to dust. His eyes blazed with pure murderous glee. "Yes!" he rumbled. "Yes! I will bathe in their fear. I will crush their bones. I will!" Malakar held up a finger. Vorlax froze mid-rant. Malakar pointed at the half-swept porch. Vorlax twitched violently. "Finish," Malakar said simply. Vorlax let out a noise that could only be described as a cosmic scream of existential suffering. Malakar ignored him. Instead, he casually stood up and stretched. Then he waved toward the airship. "All right," he called. "Which one of you is in charge this time?" A figure leaped from the ship, landing with a dramatic golden explosion of magic. As the dust settled, a hero clad in gleaming armor stood tall, his cape billowing majestically. Malakar immediately knew this one would be annoying. The hero dramatically unsheathed his sword, which was unnecessarily glowing. "I am Sir Galanthios," the hero proclaimed, "Paladin of the Grand Order, here to finally bring justice upon you, Dark One." Edwin clapped politely. "Very nice landing. You heroes are always so theatrical." Galanthios ignored him. Malakar pinched the bridge of his nose. "Look, can we just skip to the part where I tell you I'm retired, you don't believe me, and then I make you regret your choices?" Galanthios' eyes blazed with righteous fury. "The Grand Order does not fall for your lies, villain," he declared. "We know of your recent activities, the infernal summoning, the devastation of a nearby village, the—" Malakar held up a hand. "Stop." Galanthios narrowed his eyes. "You admit it?" Malakar pointed at Vorlax. Galanthios followed the direction of his finger and finally noticed the massive demon sweeping the porch. There was a very long silence. Vorlax, still holding the broom of his eternal shame, locked eyes with the paladin. His rage was pure. His suffering was unimaginable. Galanthios blinked. "Is that Vorlax the Defiler?" Vorlax let out a guttural, furious snarl. "Don't mind him," Malakar said, casually dusting off his robe. "I've put him on house duty." Galanthios looked deeply disturbed. "You put a demon lord on house duty?" Malakar shrugged. "It's my retirement hobby." Edwin nodded enthusiastically. "He's quite good at it." Vorlax gritted his fangs. The broom snapped in half. The entire Grand Order, still on the airship, looked down in pure confusion. Even the bounty hunter, who had been silently weeping into the grass, was now staring. Galanthios struggled to process what was happening. This is some trickery, he finally managed. Malakar yawned. It's really not. Galanthios gritted his teeth. The Grand Order will not be deceived, he shouted. We will bring you to justice, whether you've retired or not. Malakar sighed. Fine, he muttered. Edwin? The old hero perked up. Yes? Malakar gestured. Would you be a dear and handle this? Edwin smiled. With pleasure. And then Edwin vanished. One moment he was sipping tea. The next, he was on the airship. A series of pained yelps erupted from above. Weapons clashed, armor clattered. A horrified scream echoed across the valley. Malakar remained seated. He idly checked his nails. Galanthios barely had time to turn before Edwin reappeared beside him, adjusting his slightly ruffled coat. The airship was now floating aimlessly, its entire crew unconscious. Edwin took another sip of tea. They'll wake up in a few hours. Galanthios, now very pale, took a slow step back. He turned to Malakar. You two are monsters. Malakar smirked. You're not wrong. Galanthios wisely chose to run. As he scrambled back onto the airship, Malakar stretched and sat back down. Edwin resumed eating biscuits. Vorlax, still fuming, picked up a new broom. The bounty hunter, lying forgotten in the grass, groaned. Malakar sighed contentedly. Maybe retirement wasn't so bad after all.
If you like this video, then do subscribe to this channel.